me, Felix Aaron. Hello, science lovers. I hope you're ready for another episode of The Felix Factor, because that's what you're going to get. This week, given the numerous complaints from my millions of fans, I have made an executive decision to go back to the old format of The Factor, which you are seeing right now. So, get pumped and get ready. This week on The Factor, we're going to be talking about animals, their tissues and organs, and all that scientific stuff that you guys love. So, if you observe right now that on my right shoulder I have a turtle, then you might notice, I see some DNA on that turtle. Well, chances are you don't, because you can't see DNA without a very powerful microscope. But basically, DNA is the cell's encoding, and you can see that if you have a really powerful microscope and you look really closely into there. It's made up of A, G, C's, and T's. But anyway, DNA comes in cells, which are the most basic units of life that we have here on Earth. And an example of a cell would be an epithelial cell on this turtle's shell right here. Epithelial cells are things on the outside of an animal, which, like for example, the skin. Now, before we continue, there's a couple words I want to clarify. We got first of all, the word anatomy. Now, if I were to say that I am looking at this turtle and I'm going to lay out all the different structures and plates of its shell and how they fit together, that's anatomy. But if I'm going to say, I'm going to see how the plates of this shell work to keep different predators from biting the turtle, now that's physiology. Now that we have that clear, let's move on to the more interesting stuff. Now, a tissue is made up of a bunch of cells, different cells, but that are similar, to perform a common task. Now, for example, we might have some epithelial tissues on this turtle's shell, which help keep predators from biting it, which is very helpful if you don't want to die. The next thing we have is an organ. And organs are groups of two or more tissues that work together to perform a common function. If we were to look inside this turtle's stomach, we would see an intestine, which is a group of tissues working together to digest your food. Unbelievable. And then if we get all of your intestines together, you can't really see it out there. I don't want to open this turtle up because I haven't given it anesthetics, but in there you will find a bunch of different intestines, not to mention a couple, maybe even a liver. And these things work together to digest your food and your water and to give you energy in the form of ATP. Altogether, all your organ systems, they form an organism. So, the next thing we're going to talk about now is how structure is affiliated and can often meet its function in biology. Now, as you can see, I have a little fish on my shoulder. This is a long-breathing fish, but that's not important. So, as you can see, this fish has a tapered end at the end, and not very many poking out extremities to the side, so it can be as hydrodynamic when it swims through the water as possible. And also, as you can see, it has a tail at the end so that it can steer itself. And these are all really things that help animals adjust to their environment, or not adjust, but these are things that have to do with animals that help them be well suited to their environment. Another example of that would be this ram. As you can see, it has grooved feet, so that it can be good at climbing up rock faces in the mountains to feed on free-living plant matter. So I probably talked earlier in this video about the definition of a tissue, but I'm just going to read it one more time just so it's perfectly clear. A tissue is a combination of different cells that work together to serve a certain function. Now, in an organism's body, especially a human body, there are typically 4 types of major cells. And I'm going to use this fish for demonstration. I know it's not a human, but it has many of similar types of cells. So, first of all, we have neurons, and the nervous system composed of nervous tissue, which are little cells inside your body that connect your sensory things to your brain so that you can have movement and have feeling. For example, if I touch this fish, he will jump because I touched him, and that felt weird. Okay, next is the connective tissue. Connective tissue is, for example, bones or cartilage in a human, but in this fish, there is a bone in his tail that lets it be strong and flap through the water to be able to propel himself and move. In humans, they are usually found in noses and ears and between your spinal column. It's true. And so the next type of tissue is called epithelial. And epithelial tissues are typically found on the outside of the body, like the skin, as well as lining things like intestines and your digestive tract, as well as your esophagus and respiratory tubes. And for example, if I were to go like that, I'd probably be touching some epithelial tissue on this fish. On me, this is probably epithelial tissue, as well as there's epithelial tissue here. It's called stratified squamous epithelium. Then the last type of tissue about which we will be talking is muscle tissue. Now, I don't know if you've noticed I've been moving my mouth this video. I wouldn't be able to do that at all without muscle tissue. And this fish has been moving its mouth too, and also winking at you. And it wouldn't have been able to do that if there hadn't been muscle tissue. There's several types of muscle tissue. There's smooth muscle, skeletal muscle, and cardiac muscle, but we'll get into that later. For now, just know those are 4 types of tissues, and yeah, tissues. So the first type of tissue we're going to talk about more in depth is epithelium, epithelial tissue. This is the tissue that lines, the tissue that secretes hormones. This is the tissue that absorbs food in your intestines, and most importantly, just protects your body from outside things, like abrasions, or like an animal who would be eating you. Now, there are 5 types of epithelial tissue, and we have a courteous studio volunteer to help us with this. Now, the first type of epithelial tissue is the simple squamous. Now, as you notice, this subject has lungs, and therefore he has simple squamous. These are very thin tissues with only one layer, and they allow gas exchange in the lungs so that you can breathe in air and then breathe out air. Good. Next, we have the simple cuboidal epithelia, which are, as you can probably hear, cubed, and they line the insides of kidneys, for example. This test subject has kidneys, but you can't see them because he's wearing a sweatshirt. I just recently said that they are layered. That was false. Okay, so next we have the simple columnar epithelium, which lines the intestines. These secrete hormones as well as doing some absorption. And if you, in the intestine you have little spikes called lumen, and in them they are basically comprised of columnar epithelium. And you can see this subject's intestines too, except he is once again wearing a sweatshirt, and so therefore his digestive tract is covered.
Actually, I have a layer of skin.
Which is what kind of tissue? Epithelial. What kind of epithelial tissue? Okay, never mind. So next we have the pseudostratified epithelium, which is also columnar epithelium, but this is tricky because it looks like there are multiple layers. Nuclei, are spread out along the cells, but you can't actually. You have to know that they are not, in fact, stratified. There's only one layer of them, and they line the respiratory tract. So if you were to look down this subject's throat, you could see them. They help him breathe. And lastly, we have the stratified squamous, which, among other things, lines the inside of your cheek cells. So if this subject were to open his mouth, you could see his cheek cells. They're in there, and they are stratified squamous epithelium. And the cool thing about them is they have multiple layers, and they, when the front layer gets abrased off, like let's say you eat a spicy piece of ranch chicken, and it scrapes off some of your stratified squamous epithelium, you have lots of new layers under there that are continually growing, and that's also very helpful. there you go. So the next type of tissue we're going to talk about now is connective tissue. Now this may sound obvious to you what it is. It connects things in your body, and that's exactly what it does. But it's a little bit more complicated than that. There are several types. Those types include loose connective tissue, fibrous connective tissue, adipose, cartilage, bone, and blood tissue. And these are all different ways that your body connects stuff. One special characteristic about connective tissue is that it has a matrix, which is like a little jelly stuff that the cells in the cartilage secrete, and this makes the cells stick together and makes them sort of elasticy strong. So the first type of tissue we're going to talk about is loose connective tissue. Now this is the tissue that resides right under the skin and doesn't have, I guess there isn't a really specific example that I can give you, but I can say that it basically helps to hold different organs and tissues together. And that's its main purpose of life. And yeah. The next type of tissue we're going to talk about is a fibrous connective tissue. Now this is very densely packed, consisting of fibers, and this type of tissue forms the tendons and ligaments, which of course hold your bones to each other, and bones to muscle. Tendons are bone to muscle, and ligaments are bone to bone. These have to be very tough, or else your joints would be sliding all over the place, and that would be bad because then you couldn't do anything, which of course would be quite a shame. Then the next tissue is the adipose tissue, and this is the tissue that stores fat in little fat droplets, which might sound gross, but it is in fact very essential because you need to use fat as fuel sometimes. They get bigger when you store fat, and they get smaller when you use up the fat. It's a pretty cool system. The next is cartilage, which you have probably heard of before. It is not as hard as bone, but it is reasonably hard, and it makes up your ear. Your ear is kind of pliable, but it's still pretty tough. You couldn't rip your ear very easily. And yeah, the next one is going to be bone, and bone is made up of collagen fibers. Once again, embedded in this very hard substance, so that they can be very tough, and but still not brittle, so you couldn't crack them easily. In through bones, as you can see, of course, there are little blood vessels running through that can supply the bone with blood and nutrients. And the last one is blood. Now you might think, is blood really connective tissue? Well, yes, it is. It doesn't necessarily connect things in the manner the other cells do, but they using red blood cells. And the extracellular matrix, which is, of course, the plasma. The red blood cells and white blood cells, also platelets, help bring nutrients around to the body and therefore connect it. The next type of tissue that we're going to discuss is the muscle tissue. Now, you might think, your muscles basically bend. That makes you able to move your arm. Well, it's more complicated than that. In fact, there are three main types of muscle tissue found in your body. The first one is the skeletal muscle, which you of course know is the muscle that if you have your arm, your skeletal muscle can expand and contract, which moves your arm. And if you are ripped, as they say, that's because you have done a lot of contractions of your skeletal muscles. And the important thing about these skeletal muscles is, first of all, they are a voluntary movement. Second of all, that they have little stripes on them that are horizontal. So that's a thing, and that helps them contract. Oh look, it's my heart. Well, that leads me to the next type of muscle, which is of course the cardiac muscle. And this is an involuntary muscle that pumps your heart and moves blood throughout your body so that you can have the oxygen that you need to perform your daily tasks. When these are also, like I said, involuntary, and they also do have fibers, like all muscles do, and they are also they have strains of little lines on them, but they're different than the skeletal muscle because they are parallel with the cell. Now, if you didn't have skin and you could see your digestive tract, then you might think, wow, I have so many muscles down there, they're all contracting and digesting my food without me even asking them. Well, that's because of a phenomenon called smooth muscle, which is, of course, involuntary muscle that expands and contracts and stretches out and thereby digests your food and lets you, function like a person should. And these are smooth and therefore do not have those little striations that the other tissues do, and that's a very important phenomenon about them. And wouldn't you know, but there's another type of tissue, the neurons, part of the nervous tissue system. Now these are special, mostly because they have a very different anatomy than we think of most cells having. So they have the nucleus in the middle, of course, but they have lots of different strands coming out. And actually there are two types of strands coming out. First are the dendrites, which take in signals from other neurons, and then you have the axons, which send them away. And these cells are very important for you because without them, you would you'd find it very hard to move because you would be unable to send signals to your muscles to tell them to contract from your brain, which would be very unfortunate indeed. And just when you thought you knew everything about the human body, but wait, there's more. But wait, there's more is an all-new segment in which I tell you something extra about the topic that we were just talking about. Today I'm going to be talking about neurons. So, first thing about neurons, like I told you before, they have the body, which is called the soma, in which resides the nucleus. Then they have many dendrites coming in, which can receive signals, and then one big axon coming out. The axon usually stays the same in diameter, and it can go and then branch off many times to reach other cells, but they only have one axon coming out from the neuron. Now, one thing about axon is that it is covered in myelin, which is protective stuff to make sure that the signal is not lost within the axon. What about the axon? So we have the axon hillock, which is a part branching off from the soma, which basically is the part of it which goes right before the axon starts to branch out. So how does it actually happen while passing along of transmission? Well, here's how it works. So you have the dendrites, and then you have the axon of the other cell that is passing along the information. There's a little hole in there, and that's called the synapse. What happens is there's a little electrical charge passed from the axon into the dendrite, and it goes along the cell, and then through the axon, and then into the next axon, and then another synapse, and it happens again. It's a little more complex than that, but I'm not going to get into that right now because I don't really understand it myself. So we're going back to the allotted material. And we're talking about organs. So you know that tissues are made up of lots of different cells working together, while organs, as you also know, are made up of lots of different tissues working together. So, for example, an organ is the heart. Now you might think, Felix, isn't the heart made up of pretty much cardiac muscle that pumps the blood and that's about it? Well, no, it's not. There's many other things than that. For example, you have, of course, the cardiac muscle, and then along with that, you have the epithelial tissue, which lines the heart cavities, which helps to make sure that there is no blood escaping, because that would, of course, be bad. And then also you have the blood vessels, which go away from the heart, which, of course, are connective tissue transporting oxygen throughout the body. Another example of an organ is the small intestine, which is, of course, the smooth muscle which contracts and expands and makes the food get digested. But also you have little lumen, which are projections in the intestine, which actually help to absorb, which they're made of columnar epithelium, and they also help to secrete stuff that help the whole process. So, in all of us, we at some point become sick or become injured, or some part of us stops functioning, and we need, as a species, as a people, to obtain better methods of solving these problems, especially at the tissue level. So, for example, if one of your tendons breaks, you get your ACL, you might want to get a new tendon, but it's hard because you have to take one from your hamstring or something, or you might have to borrow one from a relative, and that's always difficult. So a new type of technology which is coming out is printing cells, which can then be used actually to to be made into actual tissue. So if you have like a printer cartridge, take out the ink, put it into a printer, and then prints out cells, and it makes tissue. And this can be difficult sometimes because, of course, most tissue needs blood vessels to supply it with oxygen to keep going. And it's hard to print blood vessels because you have to have a little hole. Sometimes what they're doing is taking sugar, putting it where the blood vessels would be, and then when the sugar dissolves, you have a little hole through which blood can run through, theoretically. One solution to this is to make cartilage, because cartilage doesn't really need blood. It is self-sufficient. And so that is one of the earliest things that scientists are doing with this new method of technology. Now it's time for a celerity round. Celerity round! So the celerity round, also a new feature on this week's show, is basically when I say a module really fast, and it goes by really quickly. Celerity. The subject of this celerity round is organs. Ready, go. So the first organ system is the endocrine system, which secretes chemicals and hormones that regulate growth. Secondly is the skeletal system, which comprises of the bones and some cartilage, which basically makes you stand up straight. Next is the circulatory system, which pumps blood around the body, delivering oxygen to your cells and taking CO2 away to be deposited. The respiratory system means you can exchange gases in your lungs and breathe in air, which makes you live. Next, the muscular system, which basically makes you move using smooth and and cardiac and skeletal muscle. It lets your body move around. Next, the integumentary system, which basically protects against your being sick and makes sure that you do not die. Next, the lymphatic system. So this basically returns excess body fluid to your circulatory system and deposits it. It's also part of the immune system. Next type of organ system is the immune system, which is basically a combination of the latter two. It protects your body against being sick, and it's also a good thing because that makes you don't die. Also, next, the urinary system, including the excretory system, is basically your way of delivering waste that you take in your mouth out through your excretory organs, which are helpful so that you do not become bloated and full of waste. Next is the digestive system, which takes things that you put in your mouth, it grinds them up, and it takes out nutrients, and then it excretes them, or it sends them to the excretory unit for them to excrete them out. The reproductive system, which, using reproductive organs, lets you create more copies of yourself, more species, so that your species can dominate the earth, so that you can, using natural selection, can become more powerful and more spread out among the earth. And then lastly, we have the nervous system, which, as we talked about before, sends signals throughout your body, controlling your muscles, and making sure that you know when something touches you. So now, out of the celerity round, we're going to talk about the integumentary system, which is a way that your body, of course, protects yourself from getting sick from infection from the outside and stuff. Now, before we talk about this, there's an important thing we have to discuss first, which is keratin. And this is, so if on the outer layer of your skin, you can see here, you have some stratified squamous epithelium. And so the way this works is there are lots of different cells. It's layered, and the bottom they reproduce really fast. So on the outside, you have a bunch of dead cells. They're filled with keratin, so they're really tough, and they protect your skin from abrasion and other stuff, and like stuff coming into your bloodstream and stuff. And then pretty soon they fall off, and that's why you reproduce so fast. But and yeah, so they help really protect you, and this is really the thing on which your whole integumentary system functions, because without it, you wouldn't really be able to do all this stuff. So now going back to the function, the integumentary system really protects you against pathogens coming into you, as well as being cut by things using the keratin-filled hard cells on the outside of your skin. Also, you have the hair follicles and your nails, which are also made of keratin, and along with also doing prevention, they can become claws in some animals or hooves to help scratch stuff and claw stuff, or to be better at walking, like if you're a horse. And another thing that hairs are very good for is for censoring, because especially if you are like a porcupine, or I don't know, that's a bad example. Let's say you're a rabbit and you feel something touch your hair. You have very good sense organs at the base of your hair root, so you can quickly turn around and see, oh, there's a fox. I should better hop away, so then you can hop away. So in early beings, it's very conceivable, in fact it's true, that they were very thin because they were unable to really circulate and care for cells in the middle of their body. But now that beings are larger and more advanced, there are lots of different new types of adaptations that they have that help them really really spread out in size. And we're going to take a look at a couple of those right now. So a couple of adaptations that animals have adapted to are, one, the circulatory system, an advanced circulatory system. Secondly, digestive, and three, respiratory systems. Now, first we're going to start off with the circulatory system. You know you have your heart here, and it pumps all blood around you. But what you probably didn't know is that it's very advanced how this happens. You have blood pumped through the aorta, into your other arteries, but then there are little capillaries all throughout your body, and they get the blood in, and they are so fine, and they pass it very individually into each cell, so that all the cells can have a good amount of oxygen. And it uses the interstitial fluid to help this process. And really, this is really just showing how this surface to volume ratio is so used well by this, because it can so effectively pass along nutrients to the body with just such fine blood vessels. Next, we have the digestive system, and you may know that your small intestine is pretty large. You might have heard stories about it being like all the way to the moon and back 5 times. Well, that's not really true, but what is true is that it is huge. So, in your body, there's an intestine. It's small. It's in your stomach, and it digests your food, and it's made in such a manner that it has the columnar epithelium cells in little columns, in little stacks, so that there can be tons of food meshed in between there, and you can digest a lot of food at once. You can put lots of stuff in there. So you have a ton of surface area and not that big of a pipe, and that's so important for animals to be able to really spread out and be more efficient in their living. And lastly, we have the respiratory system. So you know, in a lung you have the bronchi, and then it branches out, really small into small things. And these things are called the alveoli, and they function in such a manner that they're really small, and they can pass oxygen into the different into the blood cells. But they're so small, and it's in such a manner that it's really helpful. It's also extremely efficient for the transport of that into your bloodstream. So you don't even need to have huge loading ports. You just have little ones, and the surface and the amount that it spreads out is just wonderful. So, we have in our bodies a temperature that is 98.6 degrees, and it fluctuates a little bit, but it's mostly we stay at that temperature. And it's an ideal temperature for our human bodies because it makes us function well. We are good at doing stuff in our bodies in that temperature. But outside, it can be cold, and it can be hot. But that's okay for us, because we are animals that are able to do something called homeostasis, which is self-regulation. This is very important for animals. It's not only for temperature; it also you can maintain the salt balance in your bloodstream, for example. But this is so important because like animals like a ptarmigan, for example, it needs to go out and sit in the snow and not freeze its butt off, and it does this by, of course, regulating its temperature and using lots of energy to keep it warm. Another example may be the bear, the grizzly bear, which in the winter it hibernates for like 3 months. During all this time, it makes sure that it stays at a good temperature so that it doesn't die. And of course, this is important because death is bad, and it means that you will no longer be able to keep going with your organism and your species. So. Let's say you're a willow ptarmigan living in the Arctic Circle, and your body is 40.0 degrees Celsius, and you're just chilling, it's all good. But then, suddenly, your body internal temperature mechanism notices, uh-oh, it's getting cold, I'm getting cold. Well, what are you going to do? So there's this thing called negative feedback, which basically says, okay, I'm noticing that my temperature is going below 40 degrees Celsius. I need to do something about it. So what can happen is that your body puts on its heat generator and it goes back up to normal, and then your body is, okay, good, we're back to normal, and it shuts back down, and you're chilling again, and it's all good. So this is an example of how you can use this negative feedback to really help you maintain a positive or a positive a proper temperature. And so a couple keywords about this is, for example, the receptor, which is a thing in you that receives the signal. Of course, the set point, which is where you want it to be. Then the stimulus, which is basically telling the receptor, cold. And the effector, which changes it. And then the control center, which is saying, it's cold. And lastly, the response, which is basically the effector cranking up the heat. There you go. Now, we're going to do our wrap-up.